Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's FCS virtual event, Beyond the Event Horizon, Rethinking In-Person Events. We appreciate everyone joining us today for another action-packed virtual conversation. Yes, we can have action when we're just talking through Zoom. Today's event will feature Christine Farrier from Demandbase, Alix Mills from Bloomberg, Andrew Chesney from Fundamental Media, and our moderator, Larry Black from BlackMoss. As with all FCS events, I welcome you all on behalf of our all-volunteer board of directors. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to continuing our event series on Zoom. I'd also like to thank today's event sponsor, Demandbase. I want to take just 2 quick minutes. And I know that that's a lie. I've never taken 2 quick minutes in my life, but I do have some upcoming events and news to share with the FCS community. Hopefully you've seen our email that went out yesterday announcing our brand new members only virtual event series. We're looking to take over Thursdays, noon on the Eastern Seaboard. We will be launching half-hour conversations with CMO level executives from these brands, and we'll be running nearly weekly through the summer of next year. We're guaranteeing 30 events for members only, featuring CMOs of some of the most important leading and emerging and innovative brands in financial services today. When you're thinking about exciting events for the FCS, of course you think about the Portfolio Gala. Well, we won't be put aside by a pandemic. We will still celebrate and hand out 193 awards for the great marketing work done in 2019. So please join us for a virtual gala on September 2nd, right here on your favorite Zoom channel. We will continue our free virtual events. On September 23rd, we will have a panel discussion on brand to demand in financial services. This is going to be a real neat case study look at what State Street's global advisors, Spider ETFs, did with their EMI agency partners on a LinkedIn platform promoting the social media outreach for Spiders. We're going to be talking with Liz Keene, who's head of social media at State Street, Amy Ricketts from EMI, and Michael Katz from LinkedIn. Now, believe it or not, we're not limited to virtual events. We're still doing in-person events very selectively. We'd love to invite you, if you're in the New York area, to join us for our 21st annual FCS Charity Golf Tournament that will be held on Tuesday, September 29th. We have a 1 o'clock shotgun start. We're expecting at least 50 golfers to be coming out. Big gratitude going out to our sponsors who are stepping up to support this charity event. Dianomi, MarketWatch, Wall Street Journal, Barron's Group, NewsCred, Twitter, and Bloomberg Media. Additional sponsors to be named. You can go on our website to secure your foursome. We also sent out new information yesterday about the change in our membership pricing and structure. Please go to our website to read that important news item. The membership change takes effect September 1st and will impact all current and new members, as well as young members circle. Please take a look at that information. It's very detailed, and we're available to answer any of your questions. A minute about what your membership means as an organization for the individuals in the financial services marketing industry. With your FCS membership, you will have access to exclusive virtual events featuring one-on-one interactive discussions with the senior executives. That's what we're calling FCS Moves, member-only virtual event series. We've already launched the first 10 committed CMOs on our calendar. All that information is also on our website. Your membership gives you access to discounted tickets to in-person events in the future. And yes, there will be in-person events again. We're counting on it. Your membership will give you access to a national community of like-minded financial marketing and media professionals. You can go on our website and download the membership directory. You will also have exclusive access to our mentoring program, as well as the ability to volunteer and take on leadership positions within our organization across the country. And perhaps most importantly, your FCS membership allows us to continue to support our wonderful children's charities. You probably heard that we made a $100,000 donation in May of this year, despite the pandemic. That means that since the year 2000, you've helped us raise more than $2.7 million for these children's charities that we currently support. With our new FCS Moves program, we will be donating $1,000 at each member-only event to a children's charity chosen by the CMO guest speaker. So we know going into our new program that we'll be donating at least $30,000 more than our traditional annual sponsorships. So thank you for supporting the FCS. On behalf of our children's charities, thank you for sponsoring them as well. I appreciate you giving me some time today to talk about the FCS. I'm going to turn it over now to our moderator, Larry Black from BlackMoss Partners, who you might be interested to learn is a new firm he just launched this year. They're based in New York and London, and BlackMoss it's a group of multidisciplinary marketing professionals that have an established track record in designing client engagements. They do strategies to drive growth for some of the world's top financial brands. So we know we've got a great moderator today. We've got an excellent list of panelists. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It's clearly very topical and dear to our hearts. Larry, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And I guess a thanks to the FCS for hosting us today. And a welcome to everyone who's joining us wherever you find yourselves on this summer sunny afternoon. Let me first introduce our all-star panel. I believe they're coming on screen now. So we have Alix Mills, the head of events at Bloomberg, Andrew Chesney, who heads up fundamental media here in North America, and of course, Christine Farrier, who oversees partner and channel marketing for Demandbase. I'll leave their bios there. There's a lot more detail on the FCF site, and I suggest you go and take a look there. Just before we get rolling, why have we chosen these three panelists? Why have we decided to include a digital advertising specialist and a rep from the leading ABM platform to a webinar that's nominally about in-person events? Well, we do want to talk about the future of events, both in-person and virtual, but we want to do that within the broader context of the way firms engage with their clients. We see the reset, if you will, of the events calendar as an opportunity for firms to reevaluate this very large part of their marketing spend and take a good hard look at how it is delivering or not delivering on the firm's objectives. As everybody who's on the call is aware, there's been a lot of discussion taking place across the industry on this topic. What we hope to do today is really sort of take that whole discussion, that whole conversation up a level and talk about how the crisis is transforming not just the format of events, but the industry's whole client engagement strategy, and even what some are already terming, its online operating model. So just a note before we get into the meat of the conversation, it's just about the title of the webinar, Beyond the Event Horizon. I'm not sure everybody gets the reference, but for those of you who aren't fans of bad science fiction, an event horizon is a point beyond which a cosmic event cannot affect the observer. Some black hole is usually intervening and making it impossible to see what's going to happen out ahead, which sounds a lot, I think, about where we are right now, facing the pandemic. But I think we have today the right guests who are going to help us see beyond that black hole of the pandemic, to what the events are going to look like in the future. So with that, let's start at the beginning. Let's go back to the crisis in March and how firms have been coping without in-person events. I don't think we're going to dwell a lot on that. It's obviously been covered pretty extensively over the last few months. But I just wanted to open with just a quick few stats for everyone. As of the end of March, as of the 31st of March, there were almost 13,000 financial services events planned this year around the world, according to our friends over at Function 4, which is an industry events platform. About 2/3 of those are meant to be in person. And we kind of all know what happened after that. 1 and 2 of those were canceled almost overnight. And by April, I think something like 80% of those events were affected in some way. So let me turn it over to Alix to talk a little bit about how Bloomberg coped back in March, and without getting into too much detail, really basically how you've been coping since.
Yeah. Thanks, Larry. Hi, everybody. Actually, our coping sort of started in February in Asia and sort of mapped the virus around the world. And fundamentally, we've shifted from a portfolio of activity that was 80% in-person, 20% virtual to the opposite, because we did have some in-person events in this. And we shifted rather quickly to a world of what I called like feasibility studies, constantly exploring thousands of events by country and city around the world. Could they move forward? Should we postpone? Should we cancel? It was complicated to manage really this portfolio, but the considerations ran the gamut of defining like what was business critical, what were all the nuances of business critical, the demographics of the speakers and the attendees. Was it local? Did you have an audience that was global? What were the travel restrictions? All these things are probably sounding a lot familiar to everybody here. But by the end of March, we really were in a world of 100% virtual events. And rapidly trying to embrace what this really meant. And, you know, I don't know if you guys can remember back, but, you know, the idea of social distancing was just kind of a new phrase back in March, and it's something that's just kind of part of our everyday life today. So we kind of went into this as thinking about like, how could we embrace this as an opportunity for change, and a change that would really have us come out of this as more of a diverse event approach that included virtual, in-person, and hybrid. And we're really sort of in the middle of that journey right now while continuing to push out thousands and thousands of virtual events across every region.
Sounds like a pretty common experience to many people who will be
not unique, I don't think. Yeah.
Exactly. Let me ask Andrew, just from your perspective, Andrew, you know, what changes have you seen in the strategies of your clients as they tried to pivot from in-person to virtual in such a short time? And not only to virtual, but potentially other strategies like account-based marketing. We're going to talk about that later when we bring Christine in. But I know you and I have spoken, and you've sort of said how a lot of these conversations have ultimately provoked the ABM discussion. You know, so what is a firm actually trying to communicate, and to whom, by the event that they were hoping to do?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think COVID led to a reassessment of like overarching marketing strategies, with events being a singular touch point within those strategies. And I think a lot of the businesses that we work with paused, obviously for 2 reasons. One, because of COVID, and secondly, because we saw this disruption in these in-person events. And they gave a lot of thought about how to replace that personal one-on-one interaction with a prospect at a face-to-face event. And I think the end result was twofold. Number one, money went into virtual event organizers with a developed, very solid tech stack, one of which is most certainly Bloomberg, with a view of their downstream data, what they could take away from events, and how they could continue those conversations in a meaningful way. And secondly was the removal of event spend and depositing that back into personalized digital. So instead of this broader top of funnel, wide-ranging display advertising, it was much more personalized at either company or individual level, and that probably leads, you know, quite nicely into the ABM conversation that you mentioned, Larry.
Yeah. With that, maybe we can pivot a little bit and talk a bit about what we've learned, what we're in the middle of learning. I don't think it's past tense yet. You know, what we're learning about this abrupt change in the way that we're engaging with our customers. I mean, on the one hand, by necessity, we've discovered what I'm going to call the virtue of virtual events. And we've, you know, I think been surprised to see that clients have adapted surprisingly well to them. Then I guess on the other side, the crisis is giving many firms, I guess, an opportunity to just a reset, as I said earlier, and ask whether they're thinking about, the right way about their events calendar, about how they decide how to do this kind of engagement, what events to participate in or attend or host. So let's start with that latter point, if we can. I'll go back to Andrew again. I know firms are generally taking a pretty hard look at their whole event and conference spend. I've seen statistics saying it's down something like 80%, or was back in the second quarter. No surprise there. And the scrutiny clearly is being driven partly by crisis-related cost pressures. But I think it's fair to say there were plenty of good reasons to question the model that we had in place before, right? A lot of firms, and certainly not all, and I'm sure not in the case of Bloomberg, a lot of those events were primarily being driven by the need to create sort of an environment for an opportunity for sales networking. So, Andrew, just from your experience, you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've seen with that model.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, Larry. I think across a high number of clients, events were or have been traditionally a lot of the time legacy repeats. Unless they're a really huge lift and investment, they often sit off to the side, and they're potentially driven by the sales organization. So a lot of the time there isn't really the capacity client side to benchmark and review every single event on the calendar. We've had clients we've started working with that have 450 events a year in the US, which trying to manage that is crazy. And I think what we have seen, again, due to the pause and also because of COVID, is this hyper focus back on return on investment. So what is this event delivering to me? What am I getting? Is it meeting my objectives? Where does it fit with my overall marketing strategy? And is it a good use of my time? So I think we're seeing a lot more investigation client side, I would say, where people are thinking much more about, do I walk away with something that justifies my expense? And then if I do walk away with something, what do I do with it? Do I put it into my sales lead nurture system where it does nothing? Like what are my actions once I walk away with it? And also, can I achieve the same result more efficiently from another avenue? So I think, yeah, for sure, ROI is playing a key role in event selection now, and always there's more onus client side around the type of events they're selecting to support as well.
Yeah. That's a great view, I think, to bring in Christine and Demandbase and talk a little bit about ABM solutions. Christine, the problem, I guess, is not only about the selection of which in-person event a firm wants to do and trying to find a way to be more scientific about that. I think as Andrew has alluded to, firms traditionally default to an event, an in-person event, when in fact, a better way potentially to engage customers might be via digital as part of a much broader and targeted ABM strategy. Do you want to talk a little bit about this, about that approach to things?
Absolutely. And, I just want to reinforce a lot of what the other speakers have mentioned today around kind of the pressures that we're facing, right? From a cost perspective, a resource perspective, being really considerate and empathetic about the issues that our prospective customers are facing as well. And, during good times, we can get a little bit lazy with our marketing, right? We can rinse and repeat things that have worked in the past. We've got our playbooks that we know are effective, and a lot of the follow-up, research or analysis can kind of fall to the wayside because we have these proven methodologies, right? And as soon as one event is over, before you even have time to catch your breath, you're on to the next. Well, we've all been sort of forced to kind of slow down and to think about the effectiveness of our programs. I'm a silver lining, glass half full kind of person. And I think that this has given us the opportunity to really to slow down and to kind of think about the fundamentals of our marketing programs and approaches. So if you think about just really getting back to good marketing over the past couple of months, I've probably written some of the best copy that I've ever had to come up with, or some of the, best strategic thinking, because number one, I know that I'm competing with everybody else in a digital platform, right? There's some talk about webinar fatigue or virtual fatigue. So how do I really make sure that the campaigns that I'm producing, the content is going to be really compelling to my audience? And I think, all buzzwords aside, when you're thinking about an account-based approach, what you're really diving into is that there are a group of target accounts that have a problem that I know that I can solve, right? And so you want to just get really thoughtful about the messaging, the approach. And then also, I think that this is kind of forcing us to think about meeting our buyers where they are versus where we want them to be. So you've got people that are working from home. They're trying to balance their work schedule with maybe their children's learning schedule. So, how can we be really thoughtful in those approaches? And I think getting back to basics in some regards. The other thing that we think about is, doing some analysis of all of the touch points that it actually takes to convert a prospect to a customer. Were we over invested in events? And is this time to think about repurposing, reallocating? If you think about your field marketers, your customer marketers, your event marketers, how do we take some of the knowledge that was very useful pre-COVID, and are there ways to flip it or apply it in this new world? So I sort of look at it as getting back to basics and us needing to be more thoughtful and even more customer-centric in our approaches.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really thinking ultimately about what we're doing and making sure that what we're doing is tied to the objectives of the firm in terms of what it's trying to convey to its customers. Just as a side, we at BlackMoss have been working on a scorecard, if you will, around ways to sort of judge potential events and see how well they actually mesh with the objectives of the firm, and make sure that they're being measured properly. We do what we can to put ROI around them, and I think most importantly, really, in some ways, is to use sort of industry databases and to understand what events are out there, and to make sure that the event you do invest in a climate like this is in fact the right one. We're working on that with the firm I mentioned earlier, Function 4, and it'd be great to hear people's thoughts about that as we do a bit more work on it. But just looking at time, I just want to now move on a bit to the virtues of virtual events. Virtual events, weren't new with pandemic crisis. We've all tried them, some quite successfully, but overall, I think it's fair to say they didn't get a lot of traction. They were something, obviously, that marketing generally wanted to push for all the reasons we've kind of articulated in the last few minutes. But there was a lot of resistance, right? There was resistance coming from sales in particular. But now we're seeing, clients have come to accept them, as have presenters and even sales now, I think, if only out of necessity. Let me turn to Alix again and just talk a bit about, we'll talk in a minute about some of the limitations of virtual events, so we don't want to gloss any of this over. But I wanted to get your sense about some of the reasons why the virtual events have come to be accepted as well as they are. Are they actually better, if I can put it that way, both for customers and for our firms?
Well, it's interesting because I think any marketer would argue that there's value in having a more diverse event approach that includes virtual as part of your portfolio of goods, if you will, right? That work in collaboration and complementing other channels of the marketing approach. It's been difficult historically for sales organizations to really embrace that because they don't feel the human connection historically, right? And maybe that's possibly the silver lining of the current scenario that we're all living in, that virtual events really, I don't think that they're better necessarily, but they have a role. And frankly, today, they're kind of all we have. And so people have embraced them to get content and solutions and even connect with people in a way in their personal and professional lives that they never would before. There's obvious benefits when it comes to virtual events, the ease of participation for speakers and audiences. There's not a lot of barriers with virtual events that you have with in-person events. The only barrier seems to be time zones these days, which actually is really interesting when you're targeting audiences. The time to market and plan and deliver them is reduced, although I would say the human capital involved in that truncated schedule is much greater than most people are giving it credit. And then, you know, there's nearly instant access to data, so it makes us more intelligent about the way that we're targeting people. And once you have the infrastructure in place, I would say that you're saving money. But honestly, I think a lot of companies that hadn't embraced virtual before this scenario really are kind of doing a lot of catch up. So I'm not sure it's actually less money right now, but it would pay for itself over time, because there's a lot of investment that has to happen on the infrastructure side, from tools and technologies, and even how you structure your team to support that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just on the, Alex, you mentioned the data and insights that you can spin out of virtual events, and that in many ways it seems to me that, you know, there's a huge transformation going on, but there is probably the most transformative aspect of what's going on around us. And maybe I'll call on Andrew just to talk a little bit about that. You know, and an aspect of that, I think, is, and I haven't seen it discussed very widely anywhere else, but just what that's doing to the role of the event management team and event planners within, you know, their role within the marketing team, within the firm more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Larry. I think, so to answer that, I think, like, I'll answer that in two parts. Number one, we've seen a much deeper focus on the end result of what an event can deliver. Okay, so rather than being an attendee going to an event and giving a very subjective opinion on whether it was good or bad, to Alex's point, these events are producing lots of deep sets of data. So now people can make a much better informed decision, rather than Andrew at Fundamental had a good time or a bad time. There's now a lot deeper data to analyze. And in the role of the event planner, I think most certainly, and I'm simplifying this massively here, whereas before, in the majority of times for an in-person event, and if there are any event planners on, I apologize, because this is, I'm really simplifying this just for the purpose of this conversation. The focus would have been on speakers, stand build, logistics, client parties, engagement, stand giveaways, like, okay, and that's really simplified. It's now a much deeper digital role, analyzing everything from tech stack. What data sets do I come away with? What usage rights do I have on those data sets? They're now at the heart of that digital experience. A much more essential piece of sort of marketing centric data driven model. So for sure, it's changed in a huge manner. And I think to Alex's point, you know, events in the virtual space can become slightly more complex because you have a lot more opportunities to slice and dice the event. So people can attend certain sessions. You can make it free to attend. There's much more on demand. So I think the event planner now who's involved in this digital ecosystem has a real challenge on their hands to get up to speed.
Yeah, a huge change in that role, and hopefully we can talk a bit more about it at the end. I'm sure we'll get some questions on that. But once again, just hopping around a little bit, but I think the next logical thing would be to talk a little bit about the virtual event platforms, technologies that we've had to use essentially during this period. I think most people would agree they're not there yet. I think we saw the vendors do a few things right after March, April to improve them, but they weren't there yet. And I'm told that most of them have sort of upgrades coming in September in the next release, and they will have learned a fair amount. you know, Alix, I just want to go to you and talk a little bit about some of the limitations, if you will, of the event platforms. I know we've heard a fair amount about their limitations in terms of replicating the selling environment, or the sales networking environment, to be more precise. But I know one focus on your side has been addressing the sort of the more experiential, let me put it that way, aspects of these platforms and how you're able to project your brand. Obviously, one of the great things about going to a Bloomberg event has always been, you know, the fish tanks and the amazing kind of environment of your offices. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts there? And I understand you may also have some work underway to sort of try to address some of those issues.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's really funny. I mean, from the first event that we did at the beginning of lockdown, there was a couple of things that were really obvious to us. First, like, we couldn't insulate anybody from the mistakes that were happening. And, you know, like everybody thought that we were always doing flawless events, but the truth is there was always things going on. We were just insulating people from that. And the other thing is that we also couldn't keep people out, meaning that, like, our executive team attended more events in the first 2 weeks of lockdown than they ever did in the last, like, 2 years of in-person events. And so everybody sort of had an opinion about it. And the big opinion that kept rising to the top is, these will feel like Bloomberg, these will feel like Bloomberg, these will feel like Bloomberg. And so, you know, I sort of sat back and I scratched my head and I was like, they're right, they don't, but like, what is it that doesn't feel like Bloomberg? And the truth is like, we have a philosophy about how we create our events. And I never thought about this before. I was sort of forced to think about it this way because it's something that's just been inherent in the way that we create experiences, but it's a bit of an equation. And it's got 6 parts to it. And it's about creativity and content and innovation and hospitality and alignment to our impact priorities and operational excellence, all working together. None of them are more important than the other. I mean, yes, content is always king, but if the content is great and the experience sucks, then nobody will stay and they'll never come back again. Like, they all kind of work together, right? And our in-person events have historically really excelled at this. We weave all the elements together and people come and they feel really great for being there. They learn something, they meet somebody, they leave, and they want to come back again. But our virtual events are really falling short of that. And I would say most people's are. Content is still king and it's transferable, pretty apples to apples in this format. Although I would argue the longer that we sit in this format, the competitive edge of who you get to speak and what they're talking about will make content still be king, but your targeting has to be even better. The operational excellence, as I already described, is like kind of a bit of a cluster. Insert whatever words you want. It's really, really difficult to make them flawless. But that will get better as the technology gets better and our specialized skill gets better. But what we're working on, which is really, really exciting, is like, how do we bring creativity and innovation and impact and hospitality to life in a virtual format so that things feel more like Bloomberg? And I think that, like, in the old world, we would have dismissed those attributes as being not important in virtual, and you would just come to in-person to get that, and so therefore, you know, don't worry about it. But the truth is like, it's time for us as an industry to really create virtual as its own art form, to not replicate in-person events. So, but to find a way for that experience to be uniquely its own in a virtual format. And the industry really hasn't really looked at it this way. They really have been sort of replicating what existed in digital world in the past, and then also in an in-person world. And it's been really difficult to describe this to people because I think that people usually in a digital format think of experience as kind of a user experience. But the user experience is really kind of a baseline of what we all expect. We expect things to work. We expect to click on a button. We expect for some sort of intelligence with navigation, that it looks pretty, all these things, just like when you go to anybody's website. That all obviously has to be there. But the real kind of secret sauce is going to be, how can we find the intersection between technology and experience, bringing all those elements together in a way that they've never been brought together before. And that actually has me super excited, and the whole team really excited. And I think that more of the event industry that really looks at it that way will start to get kind of juiced about it as well. You know, one day you will be picking out food and decor and you know, music tracks and all the things that kind of crank some people's tractors, but like that's just not a reality today. And I think we come back out the other end more diverse and smarter in a way for everything to work together.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't planned on asking this exactly the same way, this way, but I mean, it'd be good to open it up about, you know, what is a hybrid event? Is a hybrid event essentially the ability to remote into a live event, an in-person event? Or it sounds like you're saying it's something
I don't think that's good enough. I think that was what a hybrid event was.
Yeah.
In the future, I don't know that that's good enough. And because I think that when in-person events come back, what was large format is going to be small format, which means that you have to have a really intelligent way of segmenting the audiences so that they don't feel left out of something. The people that come in person versus the people that are online have to have unique experiences. And what doesn't exist today from a technology perspective is like, how can we bring algorithms to life that allow networking to happen in a more seamless way, crossovers between in-person and the virtual, crossovers between content. I mean, there's all sorts of exciting things to think about. But I think historically, and maybe I hadn't really thought about this, maybe it was because of the expense on in-person events, there wasn't really an investment on virtual minus just the platform of enabling that to happen, which again was just that kind of UX thing. But if we're going to really lean into virtual to build experiences and bring brands to life, we have to actually invest more deeply in that, both intellectual capital and also cash.
Yeah.
So that it's truly something that people want to do, and it's not just because they have to do it that way.
Yeah. Let me pivot completely here, and I'll just stay with Alix for a minute on this. Let's talk a little bit about the return of in-person events. I mean, I think we're agreed. I'm not sure anymore, but I think we're agreed that virtual events are never going to fully replace human interaction. I mean, if only because you don't get the chance to go to the bar at the end of the day with the people who've been on your panel. But Alix, I'm not going to ask you when you think in-person events are going to return.
You don't want to know my answer. It'll depress me.
But let's talk about what's going to need to be in place for them to resume if there isn't a vaccine.
Yeah,
right?
You know,
you guys have to think about if you're going to try to schedule one of these.
Yeah, and obviously, like, we have teams of people that are continuing to work on what happens when the lights turn back on, because obviously when the lights turn on, we have to be ready, and it is going to be different. I mean, it's all the normal sort of operational considerations that we're all living in our lives when restaurants and offices are opening, you know, capacity limits for social distancing, restricting ingress and egress, health and safety plans, heightened sanitation, all that kind of stuff. But I think that what's more interesting to think about is that, like, well, first of all, I'm not really sure that experience is really that awesome, right? I don't know how much interaction you guys have had outside of your home, but again, it feels like necessity. Like, I'm thrilled to be able to go out to eat and have somebody else cook and wait on me and so forth, but the experience is not the same as it was beforehand, right? And instead of focusing on, I'm with Christine, I'm a glass half full person too, and I'm like, okay, like, why do we keep talking about the new normal? Let's talk about the new better. Like, what's better? Like, we have an opportunity to totally shift this thing upside down and be like much more intelligent and smart about it. But it's going to take a lot of different brains at the table in order to figure that out. And again, that comes back to, like, it's the people who grew up in in-person events intersecting with the people that have grown up in technology and recognizing that everybody brings something to the table. So, I mean, we are thinking about what happens when in-person comes back, but we're thinking more about how do we make that experience better for everybody, whether you're in person or coming in remotely. And I think about it a little bit like school. I don't know any of you who have school-age children, but, you know, they sent through surveys and they wanted to know what your preference was. Do you want your kid to come to school a few days a week, or do you want them to just be remote? I push mine out the door. We're just going to take the risk, you know. They're dying to go back. But I think it's kind of like that as well. Like, why wouldn't we at the end of this offer attendees sort of their own personal navigation around the content, you know, where they could come in person or they could come virtually. Part of the content could be that way. It's not just filming what's happening there. There's
Yeah.
a higher level of interactivity. There's algorithms that allow that audience crossover. There's more data to inform better decision making. And if we get it right, we widen the impact and the outcome, right? And so like we just have to keep trying it. I mean, the limits are kind of like they're unlimited compared to a one-dimensional plan.
Yeah. So that leads me to a question. You know, virtual events have been more accepted than I think we were ready for, and that's it's a great thing. But it does kind of raise the bar on what you would need for an in-person event. Like, is there a kind of content, a kind of experience you want to recreate that is absolutely going to require in-person treatment? And I'm going to throw this one at Christine, perhaps unfairly, but you know, is there, you know, what will qualify for in-person treatment in the future?
Yeah, you know, and I think that this one sort of takes us back to the drawing board a little bit. And like Alix was saying, we're going to see a little bit of a flip-flop, right? So now our burden is to say, how can we make our virtual events kind of look and feel like our previous in-person? I think when we come back to this, the question is going to be, you know, how can we make sure that, you know, the data, the analysis that we were able to get from our virtual events, that we're able to sort of execute now our in-person events with that same sort of level of precision. You know, this also sort of just takes me to the buyer's journey, or even thinking about your customer journey. I think, you know, the huge, large scale events, like, you know, as much as we would give a pinky finger or you know, a baby toe for the ability to get together and to have wine and to be at a hotel and, you know, all the good stuff that goes along with that, you know, there's still just a lot of discomfort around the ideas of those sorts of events. And so what we're thinking about is, you know, if you think about the buyer journey, is the intimacy that might be required when you are, you know, at the very bottom of the funnel, and it's like where the relationship building is coming, and the prospect is getting ready to make a decision to purchase, you know, your goods, your services, your solutions, et cetera. And, you know, one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of innovation around very small scale. So, you know, is it a very a small dinner? And, you know, interestingly, I don't think that we've quite pivoted to thinking about, you know, what's the benchmark for in person yet, but how can we get super creative? Is it, you know, a bourbon tasting where it's delivered to the person's home and you're asking people for their, not their home address, because that still has like a little bit of the creepy factor, but maybe you're asking for their preferred mailing address, right? Is it a celebrity chef-led cooking class where your guests are still able to interact with each other in some small scale format? It's still virtual, right? But we're talking 5 to 7 people versus the large scale things that we would think about in the past. I think, you know, no matter what, there's going to sort of be this merging of making sure that all of the data that we've gotten used to from virtual starts to figure out its place in person. So whether that's, you know, all of the information that you're using to inform the composition of your target account list, all of the information that's being used to understand the intent of your prospects. Like, what are they thinking about? What are they concerned about? Where are they in their buyer's journey? I think, you know, there's just definitely going to be that merging when in-person comes back into play as well.
Well, let's, I have a few more questions, but I think we want to try to leave some time for some questions. There seem to be quite a few coming in through the Q&A, and I urge any of you who has questions to take advantage of that and submit them to our panelists. But let me, I'm going to open it up to the three of you, and again, I'll give you the opportunity, if you feel like it, to talk about when things are going to get back to normal. But you know, what I would like to maybe have each of you cover is really what is going to change forever, right, as a result of what we've been through, and what's going to revert back to the way things were done, if anything. So I don't know, maybe Andrew, do you want to take a first crack at that?
Thanks for that hand grenade, Larry. I think certain things have a better chance of going back to what they were previously than others. You know, we're seeing certain events that were always hosted live, but were a much smaller format, which was portfolio managers going to meet with either institutional investors or advisors in much smaller numbers. There is a level of comfort from the feedback that we've received for the PMs or the advisors to attend those types of meetings, which are like a much smaller round table of 7-8 people in a room. I think to echo Alix and Christine's point is there's still a huge amount of discomfort across the board for people to travel, whether that's led by the individual themselves or whether that's led by the firm. And again, we have clients that are adopting a no meeting policy until March 2021. So that's going to have a profound impact on the business. So I think some things are not going to go back to normal for the foreseeable future. I think the lasting changes that we will see is this hyper focus on ROI, that there will be a lot of trimming of the fat in the event space. So again, people will look for a much more like holistic experience with great user experience, with great technology, with actionable items to walk away. And I think certainly from the conversations that we're having with our client group, the number of those large scale, and I think Christine mentioned this point, the number of those large scale events that have been supported commercially are going to shrink, and they're going to shrink in a big way, and it will only be sort of the creme de la creme that remain. So, you know, when will it go back to normal? Honestly, I have absolutely no idea. Genuinely, I have absolutely no idea. And will there be lasting changes? For sure. I think those companies like a Bloomberg or an FT that have a really, really strong events portfolio, that are used to running on demand, that are used to creating personalized experiences, will be the ones that come out on top.
Let me just, before I turn it back over to Alix and then Christine, just throw one more concept out there before we go to questions. You know, outside of financial services, we're seeing some firms, I think it was Sotheby's, I noticed, they started talking about their online operating model. So, you know, instead of sort of thinking about our relationship with our customers as being sort of these episodic event-based activities, that they're actually beginning to think about having almost a streaming relationship with their customers. So I just want to throw that into the mix too. As I turn it back to Alix and then to Christine about what's going to change and what's going to stay, whether you see any applicability of any of those kind of out there blue sky ideas to the financial services world. Alix.
I think to Andrew's point and Christine's to some extent too, like we have an opportunity to clean up the industry, right? Like and that's not actually saying that I don't know that there's fat necessarily. I think that there hasn't been funds allocated to the right pieces and parts, right? And so maybe instead of spending, you know, a couple $1 million on a giant event, that you take that money and invest back into different ways to get that connection, that is that experience and technology again, because it's sort of been a bit underfunded because we never really knew that we had a problem there, we being like the industry itself. So and on the streaming and on demand side, I mean, it's just like any other marketing channel. There's Sorry, dog behind you. They made a noise. I think that like there's smarter ways to use that diverse event approach, just like any of the other marketing channels. And there's plenty of content that could have been delivered on demand, pre-recorded, semi-live, all those different ways that didn't necessarily have to be in person. And when people in the future are going to have to make decisions based on whether they can travel or not, they're going to want a smarter way of being able to consume that information, whether they're educating themselves, getting content to be smarter at their job, or whatever that is. So again, like I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about it, but I just think that like there's a lot of room to grow in this space. And I think the pandemic has changed events forever, to answer your question. You know, do I think people will be around the table talking about really deep topics one day? Absolutely. You know, do I think that we'll have sporting events and festivals one day in a true format? Yeah, I do. But it'll be after the vaccine has happened and after everybody feels super, super comfortable that we're safe and that people can travel again. So that means that like big, meaningful events aren't going to happen for a while. And I'll go out there and say, I think it's 12 to 15 months. I think it's 12 to 15 months. I think that we'll have a series of vaccines available sometime by the end of the year. It'll take 6 to 9 months or so for that to be sustainably distributed in a way that people feel comfortable with. And it'll take, to Christine's point, a couple of months for people to trust that and then to start coming back. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have like in-person connection between now and then. But I think that like the small stuff that really doesn't work virtually, roundtables are not good for a virtual environment. You know, dinners where you're talking to your friends and to colleagues are not good for a virtual environment. We're doing that today because we have to. But there are some things that will stay virtual and some that will come back. And I just think that we have a real opportunity, as most industries do, like retail and so forth, to truly embrace technology in a way that we never did before because we didn't have to. And now we have to, so let's do it. You know?
Very, very, very nice wrap up on that.
Yeah.
Christine?
I think, you know, yeah, following on a couple of Alix's points, you know, we saw almost immediately, you know, huge shifts in our conversations with customers, prospects on how they could sort of, you know, reallocate their budgets, whether, you know, that was advertising or, you know, personalization of their websites, being able to get much greater data and insight into the activities that were happening because, you know, it was the only option. And it was like, now we have a little bit of the time and the space to actually focus on this. Another, you know, big shift we saw was around people educating themselves. We offer an account-based certification. Our enrollment in those programs skyrocketed. I mean, we saw more people taking those courses during the past couple of months than the entire years that the certification had been available. You're also starting to see, you know, all right, fine, I will binge Breaking Bad, but people were also binging the content that we were putting it out, whether it was, you know, listening to webinars while they were on their Pelotons or downloading, you know, multiple ebooks. So, you know, I think those are the sorts of changes and the shifts that we've seen, and it will, I think, you know, sort of continue in the interim until other options are available.
And Larry, to jump in really quickly around your comment of sort of episodic or streamlined and relating that to financial services, I think that the most successful partners we already work with in this business have a very, very like high frequency streaming approach to their communication. But their communication is ultra high quality, it's short, it's snackable. If people then want further information, they can go to the client's website and pick that up. But I think also additionally to that, for the first time in a long, long time, a lot of clients in financial services are looking at their whole marketing chain. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of firms out there that think about highly personalized messaging and then take people to a generic landing page. So they invest all of this money and all of this technology in a highly personalized message and then take them to a landing page that an institutional investor, an FA, an end investor would use. So we're seeing what COVID has driven for us as a business is a lot more focus in the consulting arm of fundamental around what that user journey looks like. What does that customer journey map down to lower funnel and conversion look like? And I think ultimately that's a good thing. You know, ties back to ROI, but for sure it's a good thing.
That's great. Thank you, guys. We've covered a huge amount of ground. It must be exhausting for you all. We probably have a minute for a question or two. I'm just looking through the list here. I think we've answered some questions. I see one from Eleanor Dixon-Hobbs around when will events happen again? I think you got the scary answer from a number of our panelists, especially from Alix, but it sounds about right to me. Here's a question from Craig Welch. What do sales need to adapt? I guess, what do sales teams need to do to adapt, evolve to the same return from virtual events as they do from in-person? I guess, you know, and I don't know if anybody has the answer to this, but, you know, how can they convert their model to the reality of virtual? I don't know. I'll open that up to any brave panelist.
One of the things that we've seen is even greater collaboration between our sales and marketing teams. And our sales teams are really looking to work with us in partnership to get the insights that they can no longer get from that in-person conversation. So, you know, what are the trending topics? Is, you know, a prospect coming to visit the website? What are they reading? And so I think there's a little bit of up-leveling from a sales perspective as well, because, you know, everyone has to evolve. So if you've been, you know, utilizing and I know Kevin just mentioned the golf tournament, but, you know, if you've been using golf and the steak dinners and, you know, this is a chance to sort of to grow your skills and to grow your comfort with the technology. I mean, it doesn't have to be a forever thing, but, you know, from a competitive advantage point, it really is, I think, going to be a situation of you evolve or you fade away, right? Because your peers are definitely going to be looking to find whatever advantage they can. And so, you know, we've all got to up level to some extent.
I think there's a whole other webinar there around the evolution of sales models, right, in this environment. I mean, once again, I think there's a hope more than an assumption that things will snap back at some point. But I think the general theme of this conversation is that things are changed forever and hopefully for the better. And each of the functional groups within a firm really needs to understand what we are learning and apply it to their function and stay abreast of that. So we are just about out of time, and I know Kevin would like to jump back in, but before he does, just thank you to all three of you. Really great commentary, great insight. Yeah, I'd love to do another one of these. I'm sure we got so much more to talk about. Thank you again.
Great, thanks so much, Larry. On behalf of the FCS, we'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today. Special thanks to Demandbase for sponsoring our event. My thanks to Larry doing a great job on moderating, and our panelists bringing some brave and candid insights to these topics that are very, very important to us. So thanks to Alix, Andrew, and Christine. On behalf of the FCS, all I can say is we're going to continue to do the very best we can with our virtual events, ensuring that we're bringing you solid content, great opportunity to hear from senior executives from leading companies. And we will continue to build our community virtually. So we look forward to your support and membership. Be well, everyone. Stay healthy. And check out our website for more upcoming events. Thanks again. Have a great day.